They laughed at the wrong man, and had no idea the walls were listening. It was supposed to be a routine court hearing in the sleepy town of Waverly Pines. A black man in his late 50s stood alone at the defendant's table, his gray cardigan worn at the elbows, a canvas messenger bag slung by his side. He looked tired, average, the kind of man who blended into the background of every city bench and coffee shop. The court staff barely looked up from their screens. One bailiff chuckled to another, "Hope this guy at least tries to keep it short." Someone in the gallery snickered. The young assistant DA, cocky and impatient, leaned back in his chair and muttered under his breath, "Another clown wasting the court's time." The man remained silent. His name, as listed on the docket, was Samuel Trent, charged with obstructing public order. No prior convictions. No lawyer. Just him. Alone. Judge Marilyn Carver adjusted her glasses and peered down at the file, clearly unbothered. "Mr. Trent, I see you've chosen to represent yourself." There was no response. Just a calm hand unzipping the old messenger bag. That's when everything began to change. Samuel slowly pulled out a leather case, well-worn but clean. Without a word, he placed it on the table and flipped it open. The room tilted. Inside was a federal badge. Not just any badge. A director's badge from the Federal Intelligence Commission, engraved with the name, Samuel J. Trent, Director, FIC Division 7. The oxygen seemed to vanish from the courtroom. Judge Carver sat back, visibly rattled. The prosecutor stuttered something inaudible. The bailiff who'd made the joke froze mid-shuffle. Whispers broke out like static across the gallery. No one moved. Samuel finally looked up, not with anger, not even with arrogance, but with the calm of a man who had seen this coming. A man who had waited. "I will represent myself," he said softly. It wasn't just a statement. It was a turning point. The entire courtroom shifted in posture, in energy, in awareness. Suddenly, he wasn't the defendant. He was the mirror. And every person in that room had just seen their reflection. The mockery, the smirks, the dismissiveness, it all hung in the air like smoke after a fire. For the first time, they questioned not who he was, but who they were. Samuel zipped the bag shut again and rested his hands on the table, eyes forward. The courtroom was silent. And for the first time that day, everyone listened. The silence after Samuel Trent's declaration wasn't ordinary. It wasn't the kind that gently falls over a courtroom during a break in proceedings. It was heavier, like air before a thunderstorm, charged with something unspoken. "I will represent myself," he had said. 5 words. Calm. Decisive. But they detonated like a grenade in slow motion. Judge Marilyn Carver sat motionless, her hand frozen mid-reach toward her gavel. Her gaze flickered to the badge on the table again, then to Samuel's eyes. He met her stare with the patient steadiness of a man who'd lived through storms far worse than this. Across the aisle, the young assistant DA, Brent Colburn, no longer leaned back in his chair. His legs were uncrossed now. Shoulders forward. Mouth slightly open. The arrogance that had danced behind his eyes was gone, replaced by calculation. A federal director. In this courtroom? He looked at the bailiff who had earlier cracked the joke. The man wouldn't meet his eyes. Instead, the bailiff adjusted his collar, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. Judge Carver cleared her throat. "Mr. Trent, you are aware of the right to legal representation, yes?" Samuel nodded. "I am, Your Honor." "And you're certain you wish to waive that right and proceed pro se?" Another nod. "Entirely certain." Carver hesitated, then turned to Colburn. "Mr. Colburn, does the prosecution have any objections?" Colburn stood. "None, at this time, Your Honor." He forced a smile, but his face was pale. Behind Samuel, the gallery was eerily quiet. Not a single cough, shuffle, or whispered aside. Everyone was watching. Everyone was trying to piece together the same question. Why was the director of the Federal Intelligence Commission standing trial in a rural courthouse for a petty misdemeanor? More importantly, what was he doing here, alone? The clerk resumed the reading of charges. Count 1, obstruction of public order, filed under Section 14(c), following an alleged incident involving the refusal to comply with a security directive. As she read, Samuel stood still. Hands folded in front of him. Listening, not to the words, but to the weight beneath them. Every sentence, every regulation, every protocol, it was familiar terrain. He'd helped write some of them. The law had always been his map. But now, he was letting others walk it. When the clerk finished, Judge Carver asked if the defendant wished to make an opening statement. Samuel stepped forward slowly, his voice low. No statement at this time, Your Honor. He didn't need to say more. The room was already teetering. What followed was procedural, at least on the surface. The prosecution presented its initial witness, a local security officer named Paul Merrow, who testified that Mr. Trent had refused to present proper identification and created a disturbance during a high-profile security drill 2 months earlier. He said he didn't need to comply with our orders, Merrow stated. When we asked for ID, he stood silent. Did he resist? Colburn asked. No, sir. But he had this look. Colburn raised an eyebrow. A look? Like. He knew something we didn't. Like he was watching us, not the other way around. There were murmurs from the gallery. Judge Carver banged the gavel once. Order, please. Colburn nodded. Thank you, Officer Merrow. That'll be all for now. He turned toward Samuel. Your witness. Samuel remained still for a long moment before taking a single step forward. Officer Merrow, he began, his voice quiet but unwavering, do you recall the nature of the drill that day? Yes. We were simulating an active shooter event at the Oak Ridge Municipal Complex. And who authorized that drill? Department of Local Security Operations. Samuel nodded. Do you know who oversees drills of that nature under federal counterterrorism compliance? I'm not sure. Would it surprise you to learn it's the FIC Division 7? A pause. Yes, sir. Samuel stepped closer. And do you know who was evaluating your team's performance that day? Merrow's eyes widened slightly. No, sir. Samuel looked directly at him. You do now. The courtroom shuddered again, a collective ripple of realization. Colburn leapt up. Objection. Relevance. Judge Carver hesitated. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Trent. Samuel let the pause hang like a curtain. No further questions. He returned to the table and sat down, adjusting the strap of his bag. For the rest of the morning, witnesses came and went, each one growing less certain, more careful. Each one, in some way, had misunderstood, underestimated, or mishandled the man sitting before them. They had spoken to him as if he were just another number in a file. They had ignored his silence. And now, they regretted it. During recess, whispers echoed through the halls of the courthouse. Journalists began showing up, tipped off, perhaps, by someone watching from a much higher perch. Agents in suits appeared near the exits, not intervening, just watching. Something was happening. Something bigger than the charge. Bigger than Oak Ridge. Bigger than anyone in that courtroom. Outside the frame, what no one in the courtroom knew, not even Judge Carver, was that a private briefing room beneath the Federal Intelligence Commission's Virginia headquarters had gone dark. Its lights dimmed, its walls lined with real-time surveillance of the trial. 3 monitors, 1 encrypted stream. Behind them stood Deputy Director Clarissa Ng and a team of analysts, silently tracking behavior. Project Mirror had begun. For years, the agency had suspected unconscious bias within local enforcement was growing. Samuel Trent had proposed an idea, radical at the time. Let the system reveal itself. So he disappeared. No press, no fanfare. He showed up unannounced in Oakridge with no security detail, no entourage, and a fabricated misdemeanor file created solely for the operation. Everything was by design. His silence. His posture. Even his refusal to speak until the perfect moment. And now the whole room, the whole country, was watching. The echo chamber back in court, Brent Colburn tried to regain control. He pulled out a document, a printed transcript of Samuel's supposed refusal to identify himself, and began reading it line by line. "I decline to answer," Colburn quoted. "I am not required to present documentation under unconstitutional directives." "Mr. Trent, did you say these words?" Samuel leaned forward. "I did." Colburn's eyes narrowed. "So you admit to noncompliance?" Samuel's tone never shifted. "I was testing yours." "Excuse me?" "I was testing your compliance, with federal protocol." "You failed." Gasps this time, unfiltered, raw. The judge didn't gavel this time. She just looked at Colburn, then at Samuel, then at the badge still resting on the table like a blade left out in plain sight. The real trial begins. It no longer felt like a misdemeanor hearing. It wasn't. It was a reckoning, and Samuel Trent had turned the courthouse into a crucible. The staff felt it. The officers felt it. Even the janitor, an old man who'd worked there for 22 years, leaned against his mop and whispered to no one, "I've never seen a man hold a room like this." Samuel never smiled. He never gloated. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about reflection. He was there to make the system see itself, unfiltered, unguarded, and unaware it was being watched by one of its own. And by the time court adjourned for the day, the bailiff who had called him a clown refused to meet his gaze. Colburn packed his briefcase in silence. Judge Carver sat for a long time after the room had emptied, alone in her chair, her hand still resting on the gavel she never used again. The night fell hard on Waverly Pines, the kind of cold twilight that made even silence feel heavy. Inside the town courthouse, lights still glowed in the windows long after the staff had gone. But the building wasn't empty. In the courtroom where Samuel Trent had just appended the day's proceedings, 2 agents sat in the back row, dressed like civilians, their postures relaxed but eyes sharp. They weren't from Oakridge. They weren't even from the state. They were from the Internal Division of the Federal Intelligence Commission, specifically, Unit 17, Integrity Surveillance. For months, they had been monitoring local and regional institutions under a clandestine evaluation model. Samuel Trent was not their superior in title alone. He had designed the very method they were using to test systemic bias. Tonight, the feedback loop started pinging red. 1. Digital ripples at 11:54 p.m., an encrypted message appeared on a secure network known only to the highest levels of federal intelligence. Its contents were cryptic, a rotating hourglass symbol, a single sentence, Level 3 engaged. Clarissa Ng, Deputy Director of Operations, stood inside the FIC Observation Room 9B. The trial live stream played across 4 silent screens. She held a tablet in one hand and a steaming mug of black tea in the other. A blinking icon pulsed softly in the corner of the room. "Are we in position?" she asked, not looking up. "All units checked in," replied an analyst at the far end of the room. "Satellite link stable. Social indicators at 12.3% spike. Media hasn't broken it yet." Clarissa nodded. "They will." She placed her mug down. "Initiate secondary trace. And activate social drift modeling." Outside the building, dozens of specialized teams received their silent cues. Data from Oakridge Courthouse was no longer just being monitored. It was being interpreted. cross-referenced, geotagged, psychological modeled. And all of it revolved around one man. 2. The man with no story. By morning, Samuel Trent had become a name without a backstory. Internet searches returned blank fields. His name was scrubbed from employee rosters, from FIC press releases, from archived news footage. To the public, he was a question mark with a federal badge. A shadow. Within law enforcement, rumors spread like dry leaves in wind. Some said he was part of a special unit dismantled years ago. Others believed he was deep cover, sent to test loyalty. Only a handful knew the truth. Samuel was conducting the last phase of Project Mirror, a multi-year psychological trial meant to evaluate bias in institutions under live conditions. He had planned every detail. From the courthouse selection to his silence. And now, the system was reacting exactly as he expected it to. 3. The first fracture at 8:03 a.m., a local reporter named Leah Montrose received a tip. Anonymous. Clean. Just 4 words, federal asset on trial. By 9 a.m., Leah was standing outside the Oak Ridge courthouse with a cameraman and a barely working microphone. A few pedestrians wandered past, uninterested. At 9:37 a.m., Leah's live stream went viral. Not because of what she said, but because of what someone else uploaded under her post, a short video clip of Samuel revealing his badge in court. The audio was fuzzy, but the image was unmistakable. The gold badge. The emblem. His name. Director, FIC Division 7. People didn't understand what it meant. But they understood enough to be afraid. 4. The officer who blinked. By 10:15 a.m., Officer Paul Merrow, the man who had testified against Samuel, was missing. Technically, he wasn't gone. His car was parked outside his house. His phone pinged within 30 yards of the Oak Ridge Police Department. But when his commanding officer tried to contact him, there was no response. When his wife called the precinct to ask if he was okay, she was told, he's likely on field assignment. But there was no field assignment that day. By 1 p.m., a second officer who had mocked Samuel before the trial also resigned unexpectedly. No explanation. No paperwork. No goodbye. 5. Clarissa's gambit. At 2:42 p.m., Clarissa convened a secure video conference with senior command at Quantico. "We're not deactivating the test," she said, voice firm. Director Harlan Scott, her superior, raised an eyebrow. "You're letting it run unchecked." "It is not unchecked. It is observed. You have agents disappearing, media exposure creeping in, and every internal comms line is lighting up like a Christmas tree." Clarissa didn't blink. And yet no one knows why. Which proves the hypothesis. A long silence. Then, continue. "But lock down local channels. Nothing leaks from inside Oak Ridge. Not without my authorization." She nodded. 6. The court reconvenes. When court resumed that afternoon, the atmosphere was different. Everyone had heard something. Samuel entered the courtroom to complete silence. Not hostility. Not reverence. Something stranger, uncertainty. Brent Colburn, the prosecutor, looked like he hadn't slept. He shuffled his papers, eyes darting between Samuel and the door. Judge Carver opened the session with a tremor in her voice. "The court will proceed with the understanding that all parties here are to be treated with the presumption of innocence and due respect." It was a strange statement. One that had never been needed before. Samuel didn't speak. He didn't need to. The trial was no longer about the law. It was about reactions. 7. A whisper in the system. At 4:12 p.m., a file appeared in the FIC mainframe titled, "Mirror Response, First Wave." It listed 27 names. Officers. Staff. Judicial clerks. Even 2 state attorneys. All flagged. The metrics were algorithmic, tone of voice, posture, emotional reactivity, racial skew in questioning, implicit response delay. Each had a rating. Each now had a mark. The system was beginning to turn inward. It was assessing itself. And it didn't like what it saw. 8. Trent's second line. The court was about to adjourn when Judge Carver offered Samuel a chance to speak. He rose. And said, "You should have stayed as silent as I did." No one moved. Then he turned and walked out. No closing. No verdict. No need. Behind him, the walls of the institution trembled. And somewhere in the silence, the first mirror cracked. The courthouse smelled different the next morning. Not of old wood and coffee grounds like usual, but of ozone and unease. By 7 a.m., a subtle perimeter had been formed around the building, unmarked black vehicles parked at legal distances, parked but never truly still. Their engines whispered like insects. Inside, Samuel Trent stood by the narrow courtroom window, sipping water from a styrofoam cup. From this vantage point, he could see nothing of the eyes watching him, but he knew exactly where they were. He had designed their positioning. Everything was on schedule. 1. Surveillance orders at the FIC Control Center in Virginia. The operations board showed an alert, Stage 4, active response. Deputy Director Clarissa Ng arrived without her usual tote bag or thermos. Her entire posture had changed. She wasn't an observer anymore. She was a tactician. "Brief me," she said. An analyst handed her a file. Systemic response degrading across multiple regions. Public confidence trending downward. Influence escalation detected across social platforms, more than 300% in 24 hours. She nodded. Any leaks? Nothing direct. But the courtroom badge image has been duplicated and dissected on 6 deep web boards. Half think Trent is a whistleblower. The rest think he's dead. Clarissa stepped toward the command board and tapped twice on Samuel's ID file. He's alive. And the system is reacting exactly as it was built to. 2. The internal freeze. By 9:15 a.m., the courtroom filled with unfamiliar faces. Senior law clerks from the Capitol. A constitutional law professor flown in from Chicago. Several men and women who never gave their names but sat near the back, taking quiet notes. Judge Carver's robe seemed heavier on her shoulders than usual. Brent Colburn, the assistant DA, looked paler than ever. He'd been told not to speak to the press. Told not to speak to anyone, actually. He had one job, finish the trial. But the trial was gone. It had become something else entirely. 3. The courtroom that watched back at precisely 10:06 a.m., something new happened. The courtroom lights flickered once. Then a soft mechanical click sounded from the ceiling. A red diode blinked into existence, barely visible, the size of a fingernail. Most people didn't notice. But Samuel did. And Judge Carver did too. She leaned slightly forward. "Mr. Trent, I've received guidance that this court is now under parallel federal oversight. Is that correct?" Samuel said nothing. But the silence confirmed everything. That was when Brent Colburn stood. "I'd like to motion for," the intercom cracked to life. "Proceedings suspended under Article 17b. The voice was flat, mechanical. Judge Carver blinked. "Who authorized that?" No answer. Just the sound of systems shifting behind walls they'd never noticed before. 4. Collapse begins across the country. The consequences were immediate. At 10:12 a.m., the Oak Ridge Police Department's internal server was deactivated. At 10:13, 5 more precincts in neighboring counties experienced a silent lockdown. Body cam uploads were frozen. Internal memos disappeared. Some officers couldn't access the building. By 10:25, an emergency committee inside FIC classified the operation as containment grade Delta. A new folder was opened, Mirror Fallout. Inside, the first directive read, Initiate Isolation Protocol. Zero response window, 72 hours. 5. Samuel speaks inside the courtroom. Judge Carver finally addressed the elephant in the room. Mr. Trent, you came here not just for due process. You came to test it. Samuel stood. He looked not at her, but at the rows behind her. The walls. The cameras. The watchers. I came, he said, to see the system look at itself. And that was it. He sat. Outside, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. A cold front, meteorologists said. But it felt like something else. 6. The reckonings. By afternoon, suspensions were issued to 4 state officials who had participated in Samuel's arrest. No notice. No explanations. Just revocation. 2 public defenders were pulled from active cases. 3 junior officers were reassigned to unknown departments. Some vanished entirely from the internal directory. Clarissa Ng signed off on each change. At 4:01 p.m., she issued a single command to all monitoring centers: begin downstream morality audit. For the next 3 hours, the Bureau would audit itself. Silently. Brutally. 7. The final entry at 7:19 p.m., a single file appeared on the National Records Vault. Its title, Project Mirror, End State. Inside was 1 page. No names. No photos. Just a quote, "The mirror doesn't lie. It just waits." And a signature, St. 8. Gone without a word. The following morning, Samuel Trent did not appear at the courthouse. No departure recorded. No federal car pickup. No hotel checkout. His bag, badge, and water cup were gone. All that remained was a folded piece of paper on the defense table. Judge Carver picked it up herself. Written in elegant penmanship, "You were all worthy of the truth. I simply let you show it." She sat back in her chair and whispered, "God help us." The stillness left behind by Samuel Trent's disappearance was more unsettling than any explosion. It lingered in the carpet fibers, echoed in the vacant witness chairs, and clung to every hallway where he had once walked. By 6 a.m., agents had swept the entire Oak Ridge courthouse. Nothing. There was no surveillance footage showing him leaving. No signature on the sign-out sheet. No trace of his badge on federal tracking logs. It was as if he had dissolved into the institution he had come to confront. 1. The manhunt that wasn't at the FIC headquarters. Deputy Director Clarissa Ng reviewed the extraction logs again. There had been no authorized removal, no special ops redirect. And yet, Samuel was gone. How can a director disappear from a room under surveillance from 10 angles? One analyst asked. Clarissa responded without blinking. Because he wrote the playbook. Behind her, on a private channel, a soft chime alerted her to a new message. From a secure, unnamed sender, "Do not look for me. Look at them." 2. Internal memo, Mirror Reflections. By 9 a.m., a classified document was distributed across senior FIC personnel titled, Project Mirror, Echo Response Phase. It outlined a 3-week operation to trace downstream behavior changes in all institutions touched by the trial. Metrics would include arrest patterns, post-trial courtroom decorum audit, staff resignations and career changes, psychological assessments of personnel involved. It wasn't surveillance. It was reflection. 3. The journalist Leah Montrose, the reporter who first leaked the courtroom badge image, had gone silent for 3 days. When she returned, it wasn't to television. It was to a blog post titled, "The Man Who Didn't Need to Speak." In it, she detailed her experience standing 10 feet from Samuel. She described the silence, not as absence, but as presence. Like he was waiting for everyone to realize something. The post was read over 4 million times within 48 hours. 4. A system in therapy. Oak Ridge County began holding closed-door judicial review meetings. Not because of scandal. Because of shame. Judges spoke about unconscious bias. Clerks admitted to rushing through cases. Bailiffs reported feeling like they'd been seen through. The town didn't punish itself. It paused. It listened. It changed. 5. A visitor at Quantico. 1 week later, Clarissa Ng received a visitor at the Quantico installation. An elderly man in civilian clothing arrived with no ID, no appointment. Security flagged him immediately. Clarissa was notified. Before she could respond, the man placed an envelope on the front desk and walked away. Inside the envelope, a single flash drive, a note that read, "Phase 2 is personal." Clarissa inserted the drive into a secure terminal. A video began to play. Samuel Trent stood in a field of tall grass, wind blowing behind him. He looked into the camera. "If you're watching this, the system didn't fail," it revealed. "And now, it's your turn to answer." End of Part 5. Title: Project Mirror, Part 6, The Quiet Fallout. The story didn't end when Samuel disappeared. That's when the consequences began. 1. Brent Colburn vanishes. Assistant DA Brent Colburn submitted a formal resignation letter 3 days after the court collapse. But he never delivered it in person. His apartment lease was terminated. His car left behind at a train station. A month later, a photo surfaced online, Colburn, bearded and smiling, working at a roadside diner in Montana. He looked free. 2. Judge Carver's reckoning. Judge Marilyn Carver continued to serve for another 6 weeks. Then, one morning, she walked into her chambers and found a file placed gently on her desk. No envelope. No markings. Inside, a transcript of every biased ruling she had ever made, psychological analysis of her microexpressions in court, and a final note: "You can change the story if you own the first draft." She retired that afternoon. 3. The Whisper Network. Federal courthouses began quietly circulating memos titled, "Silent Conduct Expectations." They included empathy-based cross-examination protocols, listening posture training, emotional fatigue monitoring for staff. No one said it was because of Samuel Trent. But everyone knew. 4. The audit list and internal FIC spreadsheet grew each day, tracking those indirectly affected by Project Mirror: 231 resignations, 402 reassigned positions, 14 whistleblower files opened, but also 63 promotions based on ethical courage, 90 letters of apology from officials. The system wasn't collapsing. It was shedding. 5. Clarissa's final call. One evening, Clarissa Ng stood on the rooftop of the FIC building. She looked out across D.C., her phone to her ear. No one answered. She left a voicemail: "Wherever you are, Samuel, they heard you." Then she turned off her phone. And deleted every copy of Project Mirror from her personal archive. End of Part 6. Title: Project Mirror, Part 7, The Mirror List. The list was never meant to be public. But it found its way to the surface. 1. What it was. FIC Internal Report 721-C, unofficially called the Mirror List, was a compilation of names and behaviors recorded during Project Mirror's entire span. It wasn't about guilt. It was about reflection. The names were sorted into categories: those who mocked, those who ignored, those who hesitated, those who helped. Each category had color codes. Notes. Patterns. But there were no punishments listed. Just observations. 2. The leak. An anonymous source uploaded part of the list to a public ethics journal. The reaction was instant. Some individuals were praised for showing quiet dignity in high-pressure moments. Others were embarrassed by moments they didn't even remember. Lawsuits were threatened. Some names were cleared. Others confirmed. But no one denied the list was real. Because everyone recognized the truth in it. 3. Samuel's note. At the end of the leaked file, there was one final line. The point was never punishment. It was to see who we are when we think no one's watching. Signed, St. End of Part 7. Title, Project Mirror, Part 8, The Final Reflection. 1 year later, a new case appeared before the Oak Ridge courthouse. A young man, wrongfully detained. The courtroom was different now. New faces. New rules. New eyes. But one thing hadn't changed, the silence when someone walked in who didn't look like power. Until the judge paused. And looked again. 1. Echoes of a name on the court docket. The name was listed as Elijah Samuel Trent, Jr. The room shifted. Whispers rose. Questions hung in the air. Was it a coincidence? Was it a message? Was it legacy? 2. The closing note. When the young man stood to speak, his voice was soft. I've only come to remind this court of something. The judge leaned forward. Elijah continued, mirrors aren't just glass. They're memory. And with that, the courtroom sat straighter. Because the reflection had returned. And this time, everyone was watching. The story didn't end when Samuel disappeared. That's when the consequences began. 1. Brent Colburn vanishes 3 days after the courtroom collapsed under federal override. Assistant District Attorney Brent Colburn drafted a resignation letter. He never submitted it. Instead, Brent's apartment was found abandoned. His work laptop was left behind, wiped clean. His car was located at a long-term parking lot near a rural train depot, engine cold. His badge and service ID were mailed anonymously to the state attorney's office. No fingerprints. No forwarding address. It was as if Brent had vanished into the folds of his own conscience. Weeks later, an unverified photograph surfaced on a travel blog, a bearded man flipping pancakes at a roadside diner in western Montana. The caption read, "Met a guy named Ben. Said he used to be a lawyer. He looked rested. He looked free." 2. Judge Carver's reckoning. Judge Marilyn Carver tried to continue as though nothing had happened. She presided over 3 more hearings in the week following Samuel's disappearance. But something had changed. Her voice trembled. Her gaze faltered. She began arriving to court early, staying late. Reviewing old case files. Reading transcripts she'd once rubber-stamped without thought. Then, one morning, she found an envelope on her desk. It had no stamp, no label, just her name, handwritten in cursive. Inside, a dossier of her own rulings, annotated with bias markers, emotional tone analysis from her courtroom interactions, side-by-side comparisons of her treatment toward white versus minority defendants, and a final line written in blue ink, "You can still change the story. Start with yours." She didn't finish that day's docket. She walked out of the courthouse before noon. That evening, she submitted her resignation. 3. The Whisper Network. Across the country, judges and prosecutors began receiving anonymous envelopes. Some were thin, containing a single photo. Others were thick, filled with court transcripts marked in red. None came with instructions. But everyone understood their purpose. Courthouses started holding off-the-record meetings, once a week, sometimes more. Topics included: recognizing unconscious prejudice in sentencing, tone discipline and de-escalation in court, empathy as a judicial tool. No one dared speak Samuel Trent's name. But they were all hearing his voice. 4. The morality audit expands. The Federal Intelligence Commission extended Project Mirror's reach under a new classification, Echo Layer Review. An entire division was formed to monitor the emotional and ethical temperature of the justice system. It had no logo. No press releases. Only a mandate: observe. Record. Reflect. They didn't look at crime rates. They didn't look at policy changes. They looked at pauses. At inflections in speech. At the way a clerk leaned forward to hear a defendant speak. And every time the system softened, listened, somewhere in a classified file, a green light blinked. 5. Reassignments and removals within the next 30 days. 231 individuals resigned from court-appointed or administrative positions. 402 were quietly reassigned. 14 whistleblower complaints were filed. 3 judges asked for sabbaticals to reflect on patterns of conduct, but it wasn't just about removals. There were also honors. 63 people received internal commendations for ethical bravery. 90 handwritten letters of apology were sent to citizens whose cases had been mishandled. The justice system wasn't crumbling. It was shedding its skin. 6. Samuel's silence reverberates. Though no one saw Samuel Trent again, signs of his continued influence emerged. A law school in Oregon announced a new ethics curriculum titled Silent Authority: Bias in Unspoken Power. A documentary premiered at a small festival, tracing the Oak Ridge incident. Its final scene showed the empty courtroom, the defense table with no chair. A quote appeared: "The absence of noise does not mean the absence of judgment." 7. Clarissa's rooftop call. One evening, Clarissa Ng stood atop the Federal Intelligence Commission building, wind tugging at her coat. She held her phone to her ear. The line rang once, twice, then voicemail. She left a message: "Samuel, if you're listening, you did more than expose them. You gave them a choice. And they're making it." She paused. "Thank you." Then she hung up. And quietly deleted every remaining personal copy of Project Mirror from her secured drive. The system had seen its reflection. And now, it had begun to look inward. The whisper that had started with Samuel Trent's silence had now become a current, flowing beneath every courtroom, hallway, and judge's chamber. But it wasn't until the leak that the current turned tidal. 1. The creation of the list. It had started innocently, internally. A byproduct of the Echo Layer review. Analysts had created a spreadsheet to log behaviors during and after Project Mirror's peak phases. They categorized everything: tone of voice, word choices during testimony, facial expressions toward marginalized defendants, response times to objections, physical posture each court officer, clerk, guard, or legal staff encountered during the Oak Ridge case, and its immediate ripples had been evaluated not by guilt or innocence, but by awareness. The document grew from 27 names to 230. Then to 700. Eventually, it was titled, FIC 721-C, Project Mirror, Reflection Candidates. But behind closed doors, it was simply known as, the Mirror List. 2. The 4 classifications. The Mirror List contained no sentencing. No one was fired based on it. No charges pressed. Instead, individuals were grouped by 4 codes. Echoes, those who observed bias but remained silent breakers, those who challenged injustice, subtly or directly. Shadows, those who intensified bias without noticing. Mirrors, those who altered their behavior after self-realization. Each name had a brief paragraph. A timestamp. Sometimes a single quote: "She flinched when the badge was revealed. He shifted posture and began to listen." The point was not punishment. The point was pattern. 3. The leak came not from a whistleblower or rogue agent. It came from a cleaning contractor at a substation facility in Pennsylvania. The file had been printed and left on a copier tray by accident. A USB left plugged into a terminal. A single folder, mislabeled. The contractor, unsure of what he found, posted one screenshot to an ethics forum. Within 48 hours, the Mirror List was public. 4. The national reaction. At first, media outlets didn't believe it. But court staff recognized the names. Some officials panicked. Others held quiet meetings to apologize, preemptively. Across social media, individuals began asking, "Am I on it?" Civil rights groups demanded transparency. But there was no centralized authority to issue statements. The FIC remained silent. Because Samuel's voice had said it all. 5. The humanity of it. What shocked people wasn't the surveillance. It was how empathetic the notes were. She wanted to do better. He caught himself midway through a gesture and changed. The document didn't judge. It noticed. People who had been afraid to confront their bias saw themselves on the list, and felt oddly seen. Not condemned. Accountable. 6. A cultural shift. Law schools began asking students to assess fictional case excerpts for mirror-worthy moments. Training programs for court officers included exercises like: notice the pause, unlearn your stance, write a reflection letter on a moment of judgment. One module was titled, The Silence Between Sentences. 7. Samuel's note. At the end of the publicized list, one note stood out. It was in a different font, embedded like a signature. The point was never punishment. It was to see who we are, when we think no one's watching. St. 8. Clarissa's response. Clarissa Ng never confirmed nor denied the list's origin. But she was seen at a university seminar titled, The Ethics of Passive Observation. When asked if she still believed in Project Mirror, she paused and smiled. I believe in people. Especially when they start listening. 1 year had passed since Samuel Trent walked into that quiet courtroom in Oak Ridge and dismantled the illusion that justice operated in silence. Time hadn't erased the memory. It had deepened it. Now, a new case brought echoes of the past back into focus. 1. The new defendant, a young man named Elijah Samuel Trent Jr., barely in his 20s, stood at the center of courtroom number 3 in Oak Ridge. Tall, nervous, and wearing a navy hoodie 2 sizes too large, he looked out of place in the polished wood chamber. The docket listed his charge, wrongful detainment after a stop-and-frisk gone wrong. But his name did more than raise eyebrows. It rang alarm bells. Any relation to Judge Valencia Monroe trailed off as she reviewed the file. She looked up, meeting the young man's eyes. Elijah gave a small nod. He was my uncle. The silence that followed was unlike the one Samuel had conjured. This was reverence, mixed with fear. 2. A changed courtroom. Everything looked the same. And yet, everything felt different. There were new protocols now, subtle but intentional. Defense attorneys were encouraged to speak first. Judges were trained to take pause before objection. Bailiffs no longer stood with folded arms by default. More than rules, it was posture. Awareness. Humility. And Elijah, standing at that table, could feel it. Even as an ordinary defendant, he was being heard. 3. The unexpected statement. Judge Monroe offered Elijah a chance to speak. He cleared his throat. I didn't come here just to fight the charge. Murmurs rose. His public defender glanced over, confused. Elijah continued, I came to remind this court of something important. He reached into his jacket pocket. Not quickly, but deliberately, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a legal motion. It was a letter. My uncle left this with me before he disappeared. I think he meant for it to be read aloud one day. He unfolded it. 4. Samuel's final words. The room leaned in. Elijah began to read, if you are hearing this, it means the mirror has not broken. It means someone still cares about the truth of their own reflection. This courtroom was never on trial. The people in it were never meant to be punished. You were meant to be seen. To be known. To be brave enough to see yourselves. Justice is not what happens when the gavel falls. It's what happens in the second before, the hesitation, the doubt, the listening. If you're still listening, then we've already won. Elijah folded the letter. He said nothing more. He didn't need to. 5. The verdict. Later that day, Judge Monroe dropped the charge. But she didn't stop there. She issued a formal request to review stop-and-frisk policies in the county. She directed the court to begin a quarterly bias check protocol, voluntary, anonymous, and human. And she sent a letter to Clarissa Ng. I think Samuel would want you to know, the seeds you planted took root. 6. The mirror remains in the hallway outside courtroom 3, a new plaque had been installed. A simple black square. Engraved in silver, the mirror doesn't lie. It waits. No mention of Samuel Trent. No government seal. No date. Just reflection. Sometimes, the greatest change doesn't come from shouting the loudest, but from daring to be still, and letting others hear the silence they've ignored. Project Mirror reminds us that justice isn't a gavel or a badge. It's the moment before we speak, the breath before we decide, the courage to see ourselves honestly when we believe no one is watching. Through Samuel Trent's quiet presence and Elijah's closing words, we're shown that reflection is not weakness, it is wisdom. The system didn't collapse because it was challenged. It began to heal because it was willing to see its own flaws. And isn't that true for all of us? Real strength lies in our ability to change when faced with truth, not force. As we grow older, we learn that silence can be a teacher, and humility a mirror. So as you reflect on this story, ask yourself, what kind of justice do I carry in my everyday life? What moments am I brave enough to pause for, to truly listen? If this message moved you, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to support this channel. Together, let's keep holding up the mirror, and keep choosing to see.